I spent the last 3 weeks researching the complete history of State of Decay, from its indie origins to the alpha builds being played right now. And here is what I found. You are watching the Gaming Chronicle, and this is the complete story of State of Decay. In 2013, a tiny studio in Seattle released a zombie game that nobody expected to matter. No marketing budget, no celebrity voice actors, no multiplayer, just a simple idea. What if the zombies aren't the real threat? What if your best survivors die permanently and you just have to keep going? That game became the fastest selling original title on Xbox Live Arcade. It spawned a franchise. It got a studio acquired by Microsoft, and 12 years later, the third installment is in alpha, with players testing it right now, and a release date locked for 2027. But here is the thing, that 2027 game, it might not be the game you were promised. The game you were promised in 2020 never existed at all. Jeff Strain had already built two legendary studios before he founded Undead Labs. He was at Blizzard during the early days of World of Warcraft. He was a founding member of ArenaNet, the studio that made Guild Wars. By 2009, he had spent 15 years in the industry, and he was tired of making games about heroes. He wanted to make a game about regular people. People who panic, people who get bitten, people who die. The pitch was simple. An open-world zombie survival game where you don't play as one character. You play as a community. You scavenge for food, medicine, and ammunition. You build a base. You recruit survivors, and when someone dies, they're dead forever. No checkpoints, no respawns, just a grave marker and a hole in your community. In 2019, that idea didn't exist in gaming. DayZ was still a mod. The Walking Dead TV show had just started. The survival genre was barely a genre. Strain assembled a tiny team in Seattle, less than 20 people. They called themselves Undead Labs, and for 4 years, they worked in relative silence. Then in June 2013, they released State of Decay. It was rough, the frame rate stuttered, the animations were janky, the driving physics felt like steering a shop cart downhill. But none of that mattered, because the systems worked. When you ran out of medicine, your survivors got sick. When you ran out of food, they got weak. When you sent your best fighter on a supply run and they got overwhelmed by a horde, they died. And you didn't reload a save. You switched to the nervous mechanic with the bad knee and kept going. The permanence created stories no other game could replicate. Players still talk about Marcus Campbell, the ex-soldier who carried the community for 10 hours before getting torn apart in a plague-hard basement. They talk about Maya Torres, the park ranger who survived everything until one bad night at a gas station. The game didn't just have characters, it had people, and people die. State of Decay sold over 1 million copies in its first month. It became the fastest selling original game on Xbox Live Arcade, and it proved something the industry had forgotten. Players don't need perfect graphics, they need systems that matter. 6 months later, Undead Labs released Breakdown, a DLC that stripped away from the story and just gave you the sandbox. Infinite map, increasing difficulty. It was the mod players had been begging for, and it kept State of Decay alive for years. By 2014, a 20-person studio had built a franchise. But here's where it gets messy. State of Decay was a hit, but it was a hit on scale that creates problems. Microsoft noticed, and Microsoft wanted more. In 2014, Undead Labs announced State of Decay 2. Multiplayer, base sharing, a bigger map, more of everything. But if you look at the timeline, something else was happening. Microsoft started buying studios. They bought Mojang for $2.5 billion. They bought Double Fine. They bought Obsidian, and in 2018, they bought Undead Labs. The acquisition was framed as a partnership. Microsoft would provide resources and funding. Undead Labs would keep their creative independence. Jeff Strain called it the best of both worlds. But here is the part nobody talks about. When a small indie studio gets acquired by a platform holder, the incentives change. You are no longer making a game to sell copies. You are making content for a subscription service. And Game Pass titles are judged by engagement hours, not sales. State of Decay 2 launched in May 2018. On paper, it was everything the first game wasn't. 3 maps, co-op for up to 4 players, deeper base building with facility mods and leader specializations, a plague-hard endgame, better graphics, more weapons, more vehicles. But it launched with bugs the first game had fixed years earlier. Enemies clipped through walls, Cars launched into the sky. The co-op was a tethered ride-along. You were a guest in someone else's world. You couldn't build together. You couldn't manage their base. The maps felt emptier. The story was barely there. And the difficulty curve was broken. The reviews were mixed. Not bad, just disappointed. Low 70s on Metacritic. Critics praised the core system but noted the lack of polish. Players loved the loop but missed the intimacy of the first game. The character felt interchangeable. The bases felt like menus. The danger felt manageable. But Microsoft had a different metric. State of Decay 2 launched day 1 on Game Pass. It became one of the most played titles on the service. Millions of players, dozens of hours each. On Microsoft's spreadsheet, it was a massive success. And that created a strange dynamic. The game was successful enough to keep getting support, but never successful enough to get the full sequel treatment. For 6 years, Undead Labs released nearly 40 content updates, new maps, new difficulties, a story expansion called Heartland in 2019 that returned to the original valley with the proper narrative. Heartland was good. It proved the team still understood what made the first game special. But it was a DLC, not a sequel. And then, in September 2024, Undead Labs ended all updates for State of Decay 2. After nearly 40 patches and 6 years of support, they pulled the plug. Not because the game was dead, because they needed every single person to work on State of Decay 3. By 2020, players were asking the same question: where is State of Decay 3? The answer came in July 2020 at Xbox Games Showcase. Microsoft revealed State of Decay 3 with a cinematic trailer, not a gameplay. A woman in a snowy forest hunting a zombified deer. It looked gorgeous, ambitious, cold, and desperate. And it made people believe. Fans spent years theorizing about zombie wildlife mechanics. Reddit threads exploded. How would infected wolves change the survival loop? Could you hunt for food? Would zombie bears attack your base? The trailer promised a new ecosystem, a new threat. And for 4 years, that was all we had. One trailer, one promise, and total silence. Then in 2021, Jeff Strain left Undead Labs. This wasn't a retirement. This wasn't a peaceful transition either. Strain, the man who had conceived the franchise and built the studio from nothing, walked away. He didn't announce a new project. He didn't join another studio. He didn't even explain why. He just left. Microsoft released a carefully worded statement. They thanked him. They said the franchise was in good hands. They did not explain why he was gone. But the timeline tells a story. Strain left in the middle of State of Decay 3's development, not at the beginning, when he could have handed off a vision. Not in the end when the game was nearly done, in the middle, when the hard decisions were being made, when creative differences mattered most. And after he left, the news got quieter. In 2022, Undead Labs underwent a leadership restructuring. A new studio head, Philip Holt, new creative directors, new project leads. The people who had built State of Decay 1 and 2 were slowly replaced by people who hadn't. The studio grew from 20 people to over 100, but growth isn't always a progress. And then, the allegations surfaced. Reports from IGN described a toxic workplace at Undead Labs, a lack of direction, a culture of mismanagement, the kind of environment where a game goes into development hell, not because the ideas are bad, but because nobody can agree on what the game is supposed to be. For 4 years, the community was left to speculate. Every Xbox showcase came and went without a mention. Every year fans hoped, every year they were disappointed. And then, in April 2026, Philip Holt did something rare in this industry. He told the truth. In an interview with Sunny Games, Holt was asked about the 2020 reveal trailer, the one with the zombie deer, the one that had defined expectations for 6 years. His answer was brutal. So that trailer, there really wasn't a game or a game team when we were working on that trailer. It was so early, there were like 4 or 5 people. The game was in a Word document. The trailer was done by Blur Studios. It was all pre-rendered. It represented a concept, our thoughts at the time of what might be cool to explore. Let me repeat that. The trailer that sold millions of people on this franchise's future was made when the game barely existed. 5 people. A Word document. A pre-rendered cinematic from an external studio. That was State of Decay 3 in 2020. And then Holt killed the dream completely. No zombie deer, no zombie deer, no zombie deer. 3 times consecutive. This man wanted that message to land. Everything fans had been waiting for, the infected wildlife, the hunting mechanics, the ecosystem, was never real. It was a concept, an idea in a document. a pretty trailer made to fill time at an Xbox showcase. What they didn't show you was that Microsoft had pressured them to announce the game before it was ready. That the trailer was created not to show a game, but to sell a console generation. That fans had spent 6 years theorizing about mechanics that had never made it past a brainstorming session. But wait, it gets worse. In May 2026, Undead Labs finally did something they hadn't done in 6 years. They let people play the game. Alpha playtests began for PC players. Selected users got their hands on State of Decay 3 for the first time. And in June 2026, at the Xbox Game Showcase, we finally saw real gameplay. Not a cinematic, not a concept, actual footage. And Holt made sure we knew it. He said, "Everything shown in the trailer is from the game. We did not use CGI. It was 100% game capture." The release window was announced 2027, coming to Xbox Series X and S, PC, and surprisingly, PlayStation 5. The franchise that had been an Xbox exclusive was going multi-platform, and the features, they are real this time. 4-player co-op, not the tethered ride along from State of Decay 2, a truly shared world. Undead Labs collaborated with Obsidian Entertainment, using the same shared save technology that powered Grounded. Players can start in different places on the map. They can build together. They can manage the same community. The boundaries are, in Holt's words, much greater than they were in State of Decay 2. The map is about 4 times the size of a single State of Decay 2 map, fully open from the start. No loading screens. The setting is years after the outbreak. The world has been picked clean. You won't find cans of beans and boxes of ammo just lying around. Instead, you scavenge for materials and craft what you need. Holt calls it maker culture. All the golf clubs are bent. All the hardware store's machetes are shattered. You have to improvise. Weld rubber onto a blade. Turn a tea kettle into an undead attracting bomb. Craft a serrated machete that uses more stamina but dismembers better. The combat has evolved. 2 attack buttons now. A quick attack and a power attack. The zombies have different behaviors based on how decayed they are. A fresh zombie moves differently than a desiccated one. Armored zombies require different tactics. And then there are the plague nests. New dungeons like areas that represent the most dangerous zones in the game. They have been dangerous for so long that they haven't been looted, so they have the best gear. But entering one is a genuine risk. The base building has been expanded. Settlements can be claimed and upgraded. Facilities have more depth. Creative Director Kevin Petzert says they are focusing on the simulation, the systems, the community evolution, the settlements. That's a huge part of what actually makes it special. On paper, it sounds like State of Decay 3 fans have been waiting for. But here's where it gets messy. The part nobody talks about. The fans who have seen the footage aren't unanimously impressed. When the early alpha gameplay leaked, some players defended it by saying it's just alpha. Things will improve. But when the official gameplay trailer dropped in June 2026, the reactions were split. Some fans praised the lighting and atmosphere. Others looked at the characters' animation and saw State of Decay 2. They looked at the combat and saw State of Decay 2. They looked at the visual fidelity and saw a game that, while running on Unreal Engine 5, didn't look like a generational leap. One Reset-era user put it bluntly, "I'm really disliking the characters' animation. Visually, the game in general seems to have lost a lot of charm of the previous game." On Reddit, fans who had been waiting 6 years expressed a familiar disappointment. The graphics were better, sure. The snow looked nice, the lighting was improved, but underneath the new engine, it still looked like State of Decay 2. The same janky movement, the same stiff character models, the same sense that this was an indie game wearing a bigger budget. And maybe that's unfair. It's still in alpha. The game doesn't come out until 2027. There's time to polish. But 6 years is a long time to wait for a game that, in its first real showing, reminds people of the one that came before it. And then there is the part that changes everything. Remember how State of Decay 2 was a Game Pass title? How that changed the incentives? Well, State of Decay 3 might not be. In July 2026, reports from IGN, GameFile, and Video Game Chronicles revealed something stunning. Undead Labs' exit agreement with Microsoft specifies that State of Decay 3 is not contractually obligated to launch on Xbox Game Pass. The decision now rests with the studio's new owner. Let that sink in. The franchise that helped define Xbox Game Pass, the studio that Microsoft acquired specifically to build content for their ecosystem. The game announced at an Xbox showcase with an Xbox logo plastered all over it might not be a day one Game Pass title. This is unprecedented. Microsoft has spent years telling us that every first party game comes to Game Pass on day one. It's the core promise of the service. And now, one of their most recognizable franchises might break the promise. Why? Because Undead Labs isn't really Microsoft anymore, not fully. The exit agreement suggests a restructuring, a sale, or a spin-off that gives the studio more independence. They are still publishing the game, it's still coming to Xbox, but the relationship has changed. And in this industry, when the relationship changes, the game changes with it. So what actually happened to State of Decay? The first game was a miracle. A tiny studio with no money and no corporate oversight made something that felt personal, dangerous, and alive. It proved that zombie games didn't need bigger guns and better graphics. They needed consequences. They needed stakes. They needed you to care about people who could die at any moment. The second game was a compromise. Bigger, broader, more accessible, successful by the metrics that matter to Microsoft, played by millions, supported for 6 years with nearly 40 updates, but hollow in the ways that mattered to the player who loved the first game. And the third game? The third game is a contradiction. On one hand, it has everything fans asked for. 4-player shared world co-op, a map 4 times bigger, deeper crafting, better combat, plague nests, settlement, Unreal Engine 5, PlayStation 5. It's in alpha right now, with real players giving real feedback. On the other hand, the game we were promised in 2020 never existed. The zombie deer was a lie. The trailer was a concept made by 5 people and a Word document. The founder left in the middle of the development. The studio faced toxic workplace allegations. The game spent 6 years in development hell. And when it finally showed itself, some fans looked at it and saw State of Decay 2 with better snow. The numbers don't lie. State of Decay sold over 5 million copies. State of Decay 2 had over 10 million players on Game Pass. The franchise is bigger than ever by every metric that shows up on a quarterly earning reports. But it's also smaller than ever. Because bigness isn't the point. The point was never the player count. The point was the story you told yourself when Marcus didn't come back from the gas station. The point was the panic when you realized you were out of ammo and the sun was going down. The point was the relief when you found one last bottle of painkillers in a dark bathroom, and the dread when you realized the bathroom door was stuck. State of Decay was special because it made you care about people who didn't exist. It made you feel responsible for a community of strangers. It made you grieve when they die, and I'm not sure a 100-person studio with a corporate publisher and a 6-year development cycle knows how to monetize grief. State of Decay 3 will release in 2027, probably. Microsoft's Undead Labs says so. The alpha is happening, the playtests are expanding, the game is real this time, in a way that wasn't in 2020. When it does release, it will probably be fine. It will have good graphics, it will have 4-player co-op, it will have a massive map and a crafting system and plague nests and settlement and all the things that modern survival games are supposed to have. But will it have the thing that made the first game matter? Will it feel dangerous? Will it feel personal? Will it feel like a story you are telling yourself or a product you are consuming? Or will it feel like another Game Pass title? Something you download because it's included, play for 40 hours with your friends, and uninstall when the next co-op survival game drops. Something that checks all the boxes but never makes your hands shake. I don't know the answer, but I know this. Jeff Strand built something in 2013 that no amount of money, no engine upgrade, and no 4-player co-op could replicate. He built a feeling, and feelings don't scale. You can't put them on a roadmap. You can't assign them to a 100-person team. You can't A/B test them for engagement. The longer Jeff Strand is gone, the more obvious that becomes. And that's the whole story. State of Decay isn't dead. The franchise will continue. The games will keep coming. The alpha is real. The 2027 release is real. The 4-player co-op is real. But the thing that made it alive, the thing that made it matter, the thing that made you panic when you ran out of gas in the middle of a zombie horde, that might already be buried. Let me know your thoughts on this. Subscribe for more gaming content, and I will be back with another one.